I can hear that stuff.
Yeah. Close to the corner.
Yeah, I would like to. Thanks.
Not working.
The right corner needs to go up a bit. Yeah, I think that's right.
No, I just
Is this happening? Is it still good? Right corner a little higher. Yeah.
The door jam is taped, so it doesn't.
I know, that's all. As, it was noticed from the fact that I was able to come back
It may
in.
not fall. Girl, still standing.
Is it recording?
Why is that your default?
I know.
Oh my god.
Yeah, that's my Crash Bandicoot.
No, I played too much of that when I was younger, just see
What, I mean, I don't know why y'all are making noise. I'm just kidding. It doesn't matter, there's no one here.
Oh. What are you presenting?
Huh?
What are you presenting?
Oh, like 10 minutes ago.
Three
Oh.
minutes ago.
Oh. You got
I love it. This is the best presentation ever.
Who's your chair?
Morgan, but she just stepped out because no one else is here, so she already knows what's going on.
Yeah, Steve isn't here before.
I knew he was.
Okay.
You got this. You got this. Big sway on you. This is two. Someone with a taller stature, please help me. Someone. Anybody.
I don't know.
Somebody.
Do this position.
Anybody. Everybody.
Kind of
Help.
crazy. Do you think it was good this way?
Yes.
So this is
I
my
wrote it down.
presentation on biophilia. Like it, goodbye.
It is very good.
Goodbye.
No, Jake, the ambient noise just makes the point better.
If I don't sell this project, my project is failed. This isn't even the final. I don't know, it's just kind of scaring me.
Don't be scared, it's meaningless.
Huh?
So don't be scared, it's meaningless.
Thank God it's not a Monday.
Do you know after present if we could go home? Cause I called it all nighter for this.
Well, I suppose. I don't know why you couldn't. It's really up to your teacher.
Oh.
Do you think Josue would notice?
I don't know.
A little higher in the right corner. Get a text? Yeah.
Yeah. Wait, that's Shiru. He has to show up organically.
What do you want these things? Oh, I'm just trying to find this review.
And I got confirmation that Cook is in the other presentation, which is just a coin toss on that one. But it is a coin toss in my favor for my complaints about these presentations.
I'm sure the shoes put the soles in my pants are still too.
No, I they were like talking about my nose. I don't care. I didn't want to, I didn't want to do it. Yeah, I'm actually, it's actually, there's sometimes when it's making my point. And now I have. Thank you for coming.
This is improvement after switching
Is it safe?
chairs.
Yeah, it is true.
The right side a little lower. Right
Yeah.
there.
My chair is always been
There
here.
you go.
You just didn't know it the first
I
last
feel like that's
semester.
better. Is that it? Yeah. I'm sorry, the sound you made was.
You did talk about you more last semester.
Oh, I was in.
Well, also, our one conversation was more
Yeah.
productive than
Yeah.
any of the other
Better.
ones.
Yep.
It'll be fun. Do you want to start going over?
Yeah, I guess if he walks in, then we can just, if he walks in 30 seconds, we can start.
Please.
Well, you have already
I still
Read.
I want the whole presentation.
you know the whole
I do,
presentation.
and I'm gonna do
You don't have to. I will send you this video. Actually, I'll be put on YouTube, so you'll just be able to see it.
it soon.
Yeah, I'm not gonna edit it at all.
No,
Yeah, no, that, I'm gonna render it.
Just speak up so it can hear you.
Yeah, Joey forgot that.
okay, no, I think
Microphone.
it's a good idea.
We recorded last one as well.
And it turned out,
That's what I'm
really good.
Oh.
Unlisted, but
I mean, we won't, I
You
don't,
sent me that link.
I told you how to find it.
The right
You
side
want me to
down.
bring
Just
it
look at
down?
the name on YouTube.
Now
Let me
it
bring
does
it
look
closer,
like it
plug
is
it
in
in
the screen.
If you want, I think it will be fine.
The right side up. Okay.
No, I still want you to, because eventually when we do a final presentation.
Yes.
So I still want you to go through your presentation and that way we can figure out if that works, right? Because it was kind of up in the air about how are you going to
It takes two people to put on my wall. Why?
So, the way I'm ended up structuring the book starts with an introduction that goes over all the different names that I ended up coming up with the project. It kind of starts by telling the story of me wanting to look in architectural pedagogy,
Did it fit there?
moving past that into individual exercise creation, figuring out and identifying issues that related with me and ADHD, identifying how the grading structures, and the project ended up becoming so broad with individual sections that connected to each other with architecture education broadly, that I just wanted to create an overall document that talks about everything that I've wanted to talk about, which is where we go through our sections. The book is laid out mostly chronologically, except for the first section, which talks more broadly about architecture education as a whole. It goes into it goes into what is architecture, which is just a kind of thesis that talks about design as a broad concept. I talk about what is an architect, which goes into an historical overview of what the profession was from pretty much the beginning of time till now. Then I kind of transition into who can be an architect, which talks about the current licensing procedures and my own critique of them, especially as it pertains to their connection with education. And that moves into a broader critique about education generally and my own potential approach on how education could look in the future. It then moves into the chronological section, which I go through the individual studio courses that I went through in the school and presenting what projects we went through, what problems I had during these projects, recommendations for the way that I could have seen the project go in a more constructive manner, and also just highlighting different objectives for the sequence of classes that we have now, and kind of highlighting the kind of vague nature of what as they currently stand. In the first intro class, I wanted to really detail in describing abstraction, teaching drawing concepts, changing the way that the projects are set up to more hammer down exactly what the teaching goals for these this area of education is, especially the really early, broad concepts that really help set the foundation for early students.
So can I actually pause here,
Yes.
since it's just us, let's not.
Yeah, there's no stopping.
So in terms of presenting this, I think you should be in more of a broad overview than you have.
Mhm.
So you said, the first part of the book, and you started talking about this, whereas if you had said, okay, my book is broken down into 2 main sections, or maybe 3 main sections. The first of which is the groundwork thesis. The second of which is a class breakdown. This is a breakdown of my experiences here it goes into specific years chronologically. It goes into what the projects were, what I got out of them, the parts that I struggled with, and how I can be confused. And the third part of this is the conclusion. And I know, so you have listed in these appendices, conversation with professors, student reading, exploration, ADHD evaluation. Where is this coming into?
So those are notes that apply to the project and work that I've done, but they don't actually, they're not saying anything. They're more the research things that were the groundwork for the initial project. So they're just added to the book as appendices.
Okay,
So
so
like
when,
supporting documents?
Yes.
and when, so you're going to be bringing in the tangents, or have you decided against them?
Well, I mean, there are some in here. What do you mean by a tangent?
Yeah, Inktober.
Yeah, I mean, that shows up in, it starts to show up in core 1 and then it's kind of fulfilled in the thesis section.
Okay, so I think that can be a part of your overview.
Mhm.
So, okay, these are the 3 main sections,
Mhm.
and then they're broken down further into these. And
throughout, there are these studies through
there are
variants.
these, yes, there are these other topics that aren't directly in the world of architecture, but they relate to my understanding of design
Mhm.
and how I was able to focus on something and complete. And I think that these skills translate into the
Mhm.
design.
I have a
I'm
question.
teaching architecture.
What are the T's and the A's? What
So-
are the letters in parentheses?
I really should have put a key at the top. I forgot that. The T's are just general theses. The A's are associated anecdotal stories that are kind of support the theses. The E's are exercises that I've created, and the P's are projects I'm describing that already exist.
Okay. What's S? Did you?
Side notes.
Side notes.
Do you want to hand out?
And also in your introduction, you just sort of dove right into explaining this document and skipped the overview of the introduction, so be sure, going into it too, I know I might go skip.
I think some of that comes from whenever I'm talking about, especially going mostly off the cuff, it is hard to step all the way back to the beginning whenever I know you know.
Yeah.
But it's good.
So like I said, my project is
It's like I forgot my name almost.
a critique on, or your elevator pitch, because in your project saying it's a critique on architectural education is inaccurate. But give your name, your elevator pitch, and then why you're doing it. Your elevator pitch about what it is, why it's important to you, and then
Those are best of those things.
start diving into explaining.
Okay.
Did you mention the 95 theses? Was that, I know you've spoken about it before.
No, because there's only 85 right now.
There's only,
Did
is
you
there?
see my note on that?
I did. Yeah.
It
It was funny.
Okay,
I saw
but you
it,
can still
like,
call
in
it
the-
that,
in the
even if
act-
there's not 95,
See-
that's one of the first things you say, just like.
See, but like the table of contents, which I want to do at the end, I don't want to put a name on it because the names keep changing, which is the point of like the title section. And at the moment, it really is these 95 theses of a student with ADHD going through architecture school. But it might change.
I think that
You
would be
know,
funny.
yeah.
The ADHD thing, these are my 95 theses, there's 85.
There's 85 of them. Oops,
And-
can't count.
And it'd also be funny if you had a very long title, like the one you just said,
Mhm.
but it just keeps going.
I thought it was funny that when I added them all up, because I used Roman numerals, I ended up messing up somewhere. Because at the first time I counted, I had 94. I was like, dang. Then I counted again, I had 96. Crap. Then I counted again, now I have 85. I'm like, okay, I just can't count at all. I added an extra X somewhere, apparently. Which is probably just the mistake of using Roman numerals whenever I still have to think of them as I look at them to read them, rather than just numbers, which I inherently understand. But I think it's more fun that way. Kind of slowed down reading.
But, so you actually do have some people in here that have no idea what your project is.
Mhm.
So will you go ahead and give that elevator pitch?
Whenever I went through school, I ran into issues that I eventually realized did apply with ADHD. And I had noticed other students shared some of these same problems, and I felt as though there was a lack of understanding more broadly in the kind of academic space. So I wanted to use my project to outline the problems that I had and some of the solutions that I think I've come across to bring a better light to the way some students struggle. And then there's also other things that don't have to do with that, but are just kind of my complaints.
So there are some students struggle due to, people learn differently.
Yes.
And there is a tendency, one size fits all sort of way of method of teaching that is done in architecture schools. And because people learn differently and it's one size fits all style of teaching,
It could be exclusive.
there are certain people that do really well and there are certain people that do not do well at all. And you want to do research into that group of people that tend to not do well, that tend to not really understand the way that the way these assignments are structured. You want to know if there's a correlation with that,
Mhm.
right? And maybe it is. There's a lot of neurodivergence that goes on, and you specifically want to focus on ADHD because that's what you have experience with. So that's personal to you.
Mhm.
It gives you an avenue to go down and start saying, hey, this is my experience. I can't speak on everyone's experience, but this is my experience. And this is how and why I struggle, and this is how I think it can be better.
Mhm. One thing that really fascinated me recently, and this is sort of one of the tangents, is I was talking to a friend of mine that had finished the program, and I was asking him about his experiences and how he felt going through it. And he had said, like I was asking him about, did you feel like the grading was arbitrary, confusing, you didn't know why things were happening? And he was like, no, I just never thought about it. I just did whatever I wanted and I was happy doing it. And I was like, well, were you ever confused by teachers? He's like, all the time, I just didn't care. It was a very fascinating thing for me because I was really struggled when I didn't know what I wanted these teachers to have me do or what it was to do to get what I had to do to get a good grade. That I was constantly striving for something that I didn't know what I was striving for, whenever there are some people that it doesn't even ever think, they don't ever think of it. That's like, even with the thesis thing that we're doing now, where we had talked about wanting to have this kind of structured approach to how thesis is described, and many of the teachers that I've talked to have constantly said that thesis can be whatever you want, doing whatever you do, it just is a thing that could be done. And to me, that's a crazy statement, because how can you then, as a student, figure out what you need to do and figure out what you need to do to navigate and to pass? But there are some people that they never think about it, and that's great for them. It's always been fascinating to me, the kind of lack of structure that causes the anxiety of not knowing what to do.
And some people thrive with no rails, and some people need more structure.
And that was one thing that kind of fascinated me recently, especially after talking to Cook, where him having ADHD, the no rails for him was the best option. He could just do whatever he wants. And it's an interesting amount of confidence that is also one of the issues, which that's like we had talked about, how anxiety being a symptom of ADHD is kind of like a weird and nebulous term, because there's some people with ADHD that they have zero anxiety about it and they just function in the world, and there's something with the ADHD, and that anxiety is what causes them to shut down often. Which is why I part of me struggled to tie it specifically to ADHD, and I hate the word neurodivergence generally, but because it isn't just ADHD, it's just, like we said earlier, just a difference of thinking per student, and everyone is different, and kind of calling attention to that and bringing both the structure and the freedom at the same time is one of the things that I'm hoping to achieve.
So why do you hate the word neurodivergence?
I don't know, it's just weird, it feels made up. Like, it doesn't describe anything. I agree with the idea that,
It means you're not neurotypical. It
but
means
I don't think there
is
is a.
anyone neurotypical? That's your.
Yeah,
okay,
that's
I
part of
get
the
you.
issue. And there are people, I mean, I guess if you took an average, if you took whatever the average is, you could then consider those the neurotypical, but then you're still not describing anything technically.
Yeah, and is it really the average that everyone functions in a certain way? Is it what happens to them? So I can understand.
And there are different, it's an interesting kind of scale on all the different spectrums of brain activity, where, I mean, there's a spectrum of intelligence, there's a spectrum of, there are different levels of anxiety and understanding and ways of thinking, and they all blend together to where I really struggle with the idea that there is this normalcy for anybody.
I have a note, just on the introduction. I think we need to capture what we just talked about and explain it for people
Yes, this
who
is the
don't know your project.
Mhm.
Because if I wiped everything just from this introduction, I'd be like, okay, what are we doing?
Yeah.
This right now, this conversation is the introduction in condensed, yeah. And now we can start breaking into going, all right, first section, groundwork theses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we can start getting into.
Because my overview of this is how do you bring structure to architecture for many reasons. The structure is clarity of expectations and the clarity of grading.
Yeah.
And if you have a clear outline of what you want to give your brand new student.
And clarity of instruction. There are sections, especially in the early intro 1 and 2 sections, where I have a pretty heavy critique about how we go about teaching some of the fundamental concepts, abstraction, drawing.
We need to capture that in the intro, in the elevator pitch. Because I think if we get too laser pointed on any sort of topic, you'll kind of lose the view of the entire project. Like if you shine a flashlight on her board and we talked about the flashlight points, you wouldn't get everything together.
And it's been an interesting internal struggle of mine to come up with the elevator pitch, because I always end up diving down a hole rather than describing the hive.
I think you should write an elevator pitch. It might be a little longer, it's gonna end up being an introduction, but we'll call it the elevator pitch.
And then let's do it
Write
word
it
by word.
down, and then we'll decide it, and then you'll have to rehearse it, or just read it.
Do you remember what I wrote for my preface?
Yes.
Do you think that works?
Yes,
to
I think we
describe?
can, I think that was great. I think we can just condense it a little for the introduction.
How long was it? I don't know.
1 page, almost even. I don't know how many words it is, about 500-ish.
You can. I feel like I could, if I read this a few times and talked to you, I feel like I could condense it. And be like, this is how I'm pitching to
You've had the
people.
most opportunity.
I've also sat and watched you do it for the last 200 hours, so.
Which it is genuinely hard sometimes to take a step back and remove myself from the project to get the overview.
And that will help you too, as you start breaking down all your different sections and what's happening. That will help you. Do you remember when I pulled that sentence from something that said, this is the thesis
Yes.
sentence of
Yes.
this section? Go through everything, and if it does not tie back directly to this sentence, get rid of it. It's exactly what that, and having that paragraph will help you do as you go through this entire document. Like, does this relate directly to that paragraph? Is it conveying the message I want to convey?
I'll counter the get rid of it, tie it or get rid of it.
Tie it or get rid of it, yeah.
Because I think you have, the only reason you're talking about it is because it is related in your head, but tie it in.
Yeah.
Like
There were a
I-
few sections that I've had to create of like, oh, this needs to have something in between to explain why it is involved in it at all.
Like if you go to appendices and you just look at this, it's like this is your supporting documentation. I could tie all of these to your original, like your state proposal
Mhm.
is to create an environment in which structure
Yes.
is king. Your ADHD evaluation to outline why the structure needs to be there. Precedent examples for students, structure, student readings, exploration, giving structure to that because you're explaining here, hey, this doesn't have structure and this is where we have problems. And this is all supporting, it's just like tie it down. I don't know if you necessarily have to get rid of anything, but it's tying it down.
And there's a comment I want to make just while I'm thinking about it on the way you write these documents. So you write these documents as if you're writing a story, and you sort of you build up to a conclusion, and that's great when you're writing stories, right? But when you're writing a sort of a document that's meant to be educational, it's good to not build up and have those sort of surprises, or
See, I
it's good
still-
to state
Yeah.
the conclusion and then go
I think
into it
one
and
way
then
I might
restate
structure it is, you know how in most research documents they have like the abstract in the very beginning? I think there might be a point where I can have a separate section in the beginning that says, this is what this is saying, now I'm gonna elaborate because I will ramble.
No, exactly, that's your introductory paragraph, it's.
I'm gonna disagree with both of you on that. I think it depends on what you want this to be. Because I see that in like medical theses, like when we have an objective, when we've lined up here, but if this is closer to your artwork in which you pitch your feelings, I could see why it could ramble on like a story. It
Okay.
depends on what we want our outcome to be.
Now countering you.
Okay.
Is, so some of these documents, as I'm going through them, I was getting lost because I'm thinking this isn't, I start to get in my head about where, what the information I've been given so far, I'm like, okay, this is what this is about. And then there's something entirely different that's introduced.
And you're like, what
And
am I
then
here?
I'm
That's
like,
the
okay,
charm.
what is going on?
So I think
And by the end, I think, okay, I guess that's how that tied in, but now I need to go and reread the whole thing to try and, whereas if what is said at the end was said at the beginning, I would have been able to
I
understand
don't
the
know, 'cause
entire time.
it's like a fable. Like, give us what you're like if you broke it up like this, and before we go into the stories, give us what we're learning, and then give us the story. I think that
Fables,
will.
you don't get the,
Yes.
what
No,
they're
no, no, I
talking
know.
about.
But it's blending that
Yeah.
that art style with this is a thesis document in which you need to deliver. You have deliverables.
I do have a question,
You want
this is
the
kind
reader
of
to
silly.
keep reading,
This is a silly example, but is a movie good if when you watch it a second time, you learn more about it?
Okay, but again, that's what I'm saying, you write these as stories, and I can see if you want to somehow bring that into your writing, maybe, but you need to not lose your reader, right? There is a beauty in the discovery that happens with movies, whereas if you're writing about, architecture, with NAB, with accreditation, with this, there's, for me, there's.
Those are a little drier, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm interested in these topics, but
I think some topics lend themselves to be like that,
if
and
I
others
start
don't.
getting lost in what the purpose of this document is,
You'll
I'm not
reading.
gonna continue reading, right? This is a book that you're putting together, and then hopefully, somebody will be able to read through this and gain something from it. But it's not gonna happen if you lose your readers.
I never want to read a book twice.
No, I get that.
I'm not, if I have a book that I need to read twice, I'm not doing
And
it.
if it's a good book, I'll read it twice, and maybe I'll get something during the second reading that I didn't get. I certainly will. Yeah, I'll see all these foreshadowings that I missed, and think, wow, I didn't even realize that connection.
It's
So
striking
you
your
finish
But
balance.
it.
I'm not gonna want to read probably a document talking about NAV.
Especially when it's educational and trying to make a point on first day.
If you want structure and you want clarity, let's integrate some of that in here. It's a balance, and of
I
course
think-
you wanted to read the last
I really
story.
think a kind of dual approach of keeping, like having a section and then having a beginning intro page that is literally bulleted out. This is exactly the point I'm trying to make with no fluff at all, because that's easier for my mind to wrap around than trying to restructure the way I write.
Also, the people who will resonate with this might have that problem. So,
No, I understand, don't get me wrong, I just like fighting.
no, it's a fair point to make, and I think we'll make good groundwork based on that.
And it's like all the notes that you have made so far, I don't think I've disagreed with any of them. There was one section that you highlighted pretty hard, and that was one of the earliest ones I've written. I was like, yeah, these all, yeah, this needs a second revision. But also we talked about we're not going back into it. I want to get at least half of it done before I try to go back and change anything that's fine for the
Well,
most part.
what you wanna do is, you wanna wrap up the first draft.
Yeah.
And it's, the first draft isn't meant to be perfect, it's not meant to be beautiful, a first draft's only purpose in this world is to exist, so then you can go back through it. So,
And you're at
finish the first draft.
180,000 words. So,
Well, yeah, some of those don't.
And
I'm
the
not-
word count in this is less important than
Yeah.
hitting all of the topics you
Yeah.
wanna hit, whether that ends up being 50,000 words or
don't get lost in the sea.
300,000.
No, I know. Yeah.
That's true. And yeah, be careful with rambling, because you're gonna have to go through that.
Yeah, I chop about a third of it out every time I go back and edit one thing. I'm like, yeah, I say,
And not necessarily rambliness, but how concise do we wanna make this?
Yeah.
I know we need a little fluff to have it still like a book and not a,
Because-
You
because a lot of these
actually
things-
have a charm in your writing style that even if you're changing the way you lay this out, that charm is not gonna go away. You have a charm in the way you say things that is really great. In fact, when reading a somewhat dry topic, the charm that you add into that, or like you had an early really in preface in which you were talking about your childhood. That really helps endear the reader to you. It makes them interested in what you have to say. It makes them interested in your opinions on these documents. And that's what's going to help them keep reading. And you're not going to lose that by changing the way you structure sections. Because it's your voice, right? You're not going to lose your voice.
yeah.
also, if it's short enough, you might not need that conclusion so early.
I've been trying to hit,
It's like if it's huge, you're like, okay, I would have liked to have the conclusion, but if it's small enough and concise enough, you might not need to change your structure because the reader's like, okay, I'm fulfilled.
If
In
right
my
as I start
investment.
getting confused, you start answering questions, that's okay. If
Yeah.
I'm stumped for a little while, I might put it down, right?
that's one thing I do like about the way I'm trying to structure the book, where each section is its own thing. I'm not saying if someone gets bored, they'll put the whole thing down, but they could always switch to another section that hopefully is more interesting. And I have been trying to.
Probably what it would be.
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what length feels right for each topic, because often I can say what I want to say very bluntly in 500 words if I needed to, but that can often get the point across in a more harsh way than would be necessary.
You wanna be careful.
Yeah. But I've been going back and forth on exactly how harsh I want to be in certain situations, and harsh is probably not the right word, but
No, I think it's the right word.
blunt, yeah. Because I've had to go back several times and remove things because it was just me trying to soften a blow to criticize the school. And I don't want the blows to be hard enough to where someone that actually could change the things that would help is like, they're being mean.
Be
Well,
careful there.
That's the thing, you have
No, I
to,
know.
and it's not about sugarcoating, it's about having people skills, right? You need to be able to communicate your ideas in such a way that you're not going to cause offense, that you are, that the person you are trying to communicate with can hear them. And that is possible. I don't care how difficult the topic is, I don't care how critical the topic is. It is possible to communicate it in a way in which they can hear them, so long as you word it appropriately, right, and sort of fall into those people skills.
We're also not criticizing the school. I think that's a bad way to
No,
put it. We're
not
criticizing
the
the process
school.
in which the school has adopted. So it's different.
Seems like that's
It's
just a
different.
roundabout
No,
way of
it's not.
saying it.
It's different. It's the way you think about it.
Well, I understand.
You never criticize someone's class. You criticize the process or the way in
The
which they
system.
operate, the
The
system.
system in
So-
which these
And you can, because
things
the,
are operating under.
But isn't saying,
So
and
you're
I know
taking
exactly
the
what you
blame
mean.
off of someone specifically and you're putting it on the overall system, and that's what it is.
I think that is the overall
Exactly, no,
problem.
yeah.
because it's intention too. You could have people with great intentions following a bad process because they're like, okay, this is the process, I'm gonna do my best with this process.
Also, a lot of times, some of the teachers that I know have had less than ideal processes is just because no one has ever told them this doesn't work for them. And a lot of students, like, one of the parts in the beginning is just me saying, these are all the things I wish I would have said to teachers when I was taking the class, because I was not necessarily lost, because there was always a point where I knew what I could do, but there was always this underlying question of, I don't really understand what you're asking me to do here, and there was many times where, when I would say that, there still just would be no clear answer, because no one else asked it, so they had never been challenged in that way to answer it.
So in lean methodologies, when you look at manufacturing, or like how Toyota operates, you want to empower your subject matter expert. And this point, I would say it's the students, not necessarily the teachers. Think about the students in the class; they're the experts on how this education is coming across. We need to find a way to empower them to raise their hand and address that concern, because without that, you can't continue the improvement process. Like if you took, I know we have the school surveys, but I doubt their
Yeah, I've never
effectiveness, but if you can empower them in the moment of like, hey, I don't understand this, it's not clear, if we can get that empowerment on the early
I've
level.
talked to students before when they were going to fill out a survey for a teacher and asked them, did you do what you do? We've been in the same class, I've heard you complain, did you say these things? And they're like, no. How could
Absolutely
I
not.
do that? And I'm like, because that's what they're for, which is just my own.
Well, but therefore, that professor's boss being
Yes.
able to see how that
That's
comes
not what we
across,
need.
which we can
Yeah.
do that. It can be a safer sort of way that the students can communicate with this professor, and professor work. They work together rather than it just being a method to determine whether or not this professor gets a raise.
Which I don't think is a good way of determining if a teacher should get a raise or not.
I actually don't think that is how it's determined, but I do think it would go into effect with
It's
whether or
overall
not they
reviews.
get, if they continue. If you have a lot of students saying this teacher is terrible, they potentially won't have a renewed contract or get tenured.
And there is something to be said
Or
that,
if the class should be restructured, or, so yeah, there is some.
well, if a student is going to the review, the survey to do it, that goes to the teacher, or goes to their boss, and the boss, it is now their job to coach the teacher to do that, there is a little bit of that I don't always, I do question if that has really been done.
It's not the boss's job to coach.
It is the boss's job to
job
coach.
to,
That I disagree.
not in this setting, because the boss is the dean, and the dean is overseeing sort of everything, whereas
If the teacher's having a problem.
it's like if you bring in, you as the architect, right, and you would bring in mechanical, you would bring in experts. It's not your job to tell the experts in mechanical how to do mechanical. It's just your job to see that something's not working and that they need
Well-
to fix it, right? But they're still the experts
I'll
that you have brought in.
push back on that, and
Like if you're stopping to teach them how to
if it's
be a
not,
mechanic or how to do HVAC, or then you probably just need to hire a different company.
that's a fair point.
But
But
you-
what I mean is, if it is your boss's job to coach you in where you are failing or messing up or the improvement, if it isn't, where's the oversight?
So it's, well, okay, so in this case, and is this a productive
Or-
tangent?
Probably, or like I'll give the example of let's say a teacher didn't never show up to class, and all the students are the only person they go to if they go to.
Well, then, yes, that, you don't need to be an expert in teaching to understand that, a professor should probably be showing up.
Should the dean not be the person guiding the school's curriculum? They determine.
I'm
No,
gonna
that's
jump
the
in here.
director.
I think what we're discussing.
But that's what I mean. Our school is weird and different because we don't have a dean, we have a director.
Well, we have a director and then we have a dean.
Yeah, so-
There's a
and our
business
dean
hierarchy.
doesn't- I question whether or not our dean actually has anything to really do with the school.
And in theory, the director should have some teaching experience, but again, the professors that you bring in, are meant to be experts.
I'm gonna jump in here. It's too late by the time it's got to the survey. Class is done.
I agree.
I think that's why your journal, so I'm just tying back to this, I think that's why you have your journal, you need that feedback going back and forth. If we're getting feedback from students on the survey after the class, we're too late. We've not course corrected, the students disgruntled. So, yes, I agree with everything you guys are talking about, however, I don't think we're addressing the problem in time.
I agree.
And I think we need to tie it back, that's the journaling, that's the structure, we're empowering the people on the ground level to bring up these concerns and then having a framework how to address it. So that because you're never gonna take a class again. Yes, you can leave this great survey and have the professor change their ways, but then it's too late for you. We're looking at the individual student, we want a system to address these concerns as they come up, so that the professor can understand, okay, maybe I've understood this in other classrooms, my other students have gotten it, but we've got this individual problem here.
The interesting thing that I like about the idea of the journals is that it does put some of the animus on the teacher to make sure that the student is not lost.
Yes. But it's also on the student to explain what they're lost.
Yes, but it's kind of like I said, an overall framework that is now describing a method which teachers and students can talk with one another to come to some understanding, which I don't think it is well addressed in the ways we do it now. And I haven't taken every teacher, so I don't
And
know.
your point in this, with that topic, is saying this is something that needs to be addressed and there needs to be a more open method of communication. One way of achieving this could be this
Yeah.
journal, the that journal. We are just about out of time and anything final.
Do y'all have any questions?
Personally, no, I mean, I honestly look forward to your book.
Yeah.
I would love to be able to read it because, I mean, there are some things that I feel that are either passed or missed due to the time constraint, what happens during the studio, and as well as the commitments that some other people have that you might not be able to get the amount of information that you might need. And so I think for me as a student going forward or as a future student coming through this program, would be very valuable to have this book because, I mean, I tell most of the students or TAs as well as Dylan, Julia, who have also TAs as well as Anna, that, look at issue, look at these things, to research, but to have the availability of have a book, right, in store for the said person who is an experience of another student in his own person with his own troubles and stuff like that, I think is very heartwarming to be honest.
That is,
I think
it's interesting because the first conception of the project was need to go around to all the teachers and gather what exactly it was that they are going to teach, what they value, what they think should be done, and how they go about doing it. So you could put together kind of a book for the school for any new student to understand as they enter into any individual teacher,
Exactly.
what you can look forward to seeing.
And how to get the most out of your education and how
Agreed.
you might.
I think as a person that's also in my thesis, you made me reflect on a lot, like especially core, especially intro, those were my toughest times, intro and core. But in advanced, I flourished because I had professors that saw my value and they encouraged me, whereas in core and intro, I just felt like if I didn't understand something, it was like, okay, well, you don't understand something, go sit in the corner,
We'll catch you next project on that.
Yeah, we'll catch you later, so.
I almost had the opposite experience.
I also
And I
had
think-
the opposite
And I
experience.
think that's a good point that your thesis is about is even if you're not, I know you didn't like the word, so, but even
Everyone
if you're not
learns
necessarily,
differently.
yeah,
Yeah.
every single person
Yeah.
is different and having this sort of if I understood correctly, but, I do feel like it shouldn't have to be the end of the semester where a student has the opportunity to submit an anonymous
Yeah.
survey.
And they're not anonymous.
'Cause
Oh, they're not?
No.
Yeah, they're not.
They have numbers attached to them, and you can go look back and look
the
at them.
panic hasn't.
They're anonymous.
I refuse to
can't-
believe that.
I could show you my
They've been
survey,
your
there's
teacher
no
for
way
a
for you to find
semester?
out.
They're anonymous to
Sounds
the
like
teacher.
if they're
I
not,
think
that
they're-
explains
oh,
it.
So they're anonymous to the individual teacher, but administration to they're not anonymous.
Oh, yeah, but that's,
That's what I
But
mean.
that's
That's
a breach of
totally
violation if they
disconnected.
show the professor.
They
and
they don't.
they don't.
But I do think it's really important. I don't mean this in a like, look at me type way, but I do know I am not, it's not common that a student is like bold enough to tell the professor directly. Most of the time I am very stubborn, so, and sometimes refuse to like cut corners, and a lot of times professors take that as you're obsessing and it's pointless, go back on track. Like, but there is a point, I promise you, it's a very important point. It's just we're all different and we
Yeah.
value different things, and then that's what leads someone to go, I want my thesis to be like this, cause they're so into it, that's what they want to narrow down on.
And instead of every class having maybe 20% of the students, whichever side,
Yeah.
20% of students not doing well, is there a way classes can be taught in which all of that is
That's like
addressed,
one of the
and 100% of them. And you're always gonna have students that care less than
Yeah,
most of
for
them.
sure.
But
I don't know. I don't think anyone going for a master's degree does not care. And if
This
they
is
don't,
true.
they shouldn't be.
This is true. You kind of cycle.
I think some people,
don't care
I
if they're
think the
undergrad.
point to that is like some people overthink and some people just do it to get it done.
And the overthinkers are the ones that need structure.
And get
Yeah.
dispossessed as well. That's like one of the points I made recently, that I like the most recent thing I wrote on was talking about these ideas of these rules of thumb that you're given, or that always bothered me, because I would ask the teacher, I'll give the example of my last advance, where he's like, just space your, he told the entire class, space your columns this much. And I was like, well, I wanna do something different, how do you actually do that? And he's like, don't worry about that, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, it kinda matters
Yeah.
for,
And that's the issue, because it's more of like they want you to focus on a certain criteria, they want you to have a foundation for what you learn, for your understanding to move forward, because what I think isn't really touched or foreshadowed is that in reality, at some point, you yourself or the professor who you take future-wise might actually touch on it, but might, that's the key thing.
It's
And-
like one of the things I wanted to say, like really specifically, is intro and core should be defined and incredibly structured to hit every point you need to then get into advanced. And then advanced, let the teachers do whatever they want. Let them teach however they want. That is kind of where I'd want every teacher to put out their kind of own micro book of what they're going to actually teach. Because one of my biggest frustrations going to advanced is you go to take these classes and the teachers give a pitch at the beginning,
Yep.
but I've had teachers that didn't follow through with their pitch, that didn't have a plan once they got into the class. And some of them have, that's their style of teaching, sure. But it always really frustrated me because it's this huge amount of anxiety of like, I don't know what I'm gonna pick, and now I'm gonna get stuck with a teacher that
It's
may
not
not
compatible.
vibe with at all.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting.
I think it's great to bring that perspective, but I also think it's really important to touch on the bigger picture, and that's towards the students, and being sure that, just going back and touching base on, the diversity of different students, and being sure that, when they read the book, they question themselves about, what do I value? What are the things important that I read about this book that'll help in the future? I think it's more just on the, as you're saying with what's happening there, but I think we can mainly focus and have this people here, the audience reading your book about what they can do to promote themselves, value themselves throughout those chapters and stuff like that. I think for me that's kind of important and influential.
Well, I'll get out of it.
Thank you, guys.
So thank you all.
Voice. question what for, I'm gonna be right back.
Did you get my email?
No,
Oh,
it was in Daniel's, they scheduled us at the same time.
I know, I saw. I understand.
So,
Do you have to present?
Are-
Oh, no, I'm not.
you applied to
You over here?
no, I actually just have these,
sorry.
little handouts, the different versions of 15, somebody, was it recorded? Okay, so maybe I can.